Being dead had its advantages. Johnny could control his sense of smell and didn't need to take in the putrid stink of dead fish and oil if he didn't want to. He could block it or enhance it, something humans couldn't do. But Johnny didn't mind. He actually liked the scent. A.D. 1973, total darkness. Texas. The smell of Texas dirt and Texas dry leaked into the room. Johnny Carradine, or rather, the creature that was once Johnny Carradine, opened his eyes. Johnny did this every night in the darkness. It was time for him to arise, and as always, he had a purpose in mind. That bastard, he spat through cracked lips. The air that came out of his lungs was fetid and cold. Somewhere to the left of the coffin, he heard scurrying and chitters. Rats? He sniffed. The place smelled of offal and old pee, but it didn't bother Johnny Carradine. That bastard's going to pay, he snarled. He could taste old blood in his mouth. Vengeance, he whispered. I want my vengeance. He could almost taste new blood. He was going to make the man pay. It was that damned bastard's fault he was like this. Johnny would kill the President of the United States of America. Richard Nixon? Oh no, not Nixon. Not the current president, but his predecessor. The guy who was in office before Nixon. Even though he wasn't the guy either who was responsible for drafting Johnny when he was only 18 and sent him to Vietnam. In 1960, his whole life was in front of him. He had been so scrawny he barely passed the physical examination, but they sent him to Nam anyways. Now his life was over. His sanity had eroded. He had been far too young to deal with what had happened to him. After the war, he made his plan. He journeyed to Texas and found an old abandoned oil refinery in Dallas to set up housing in. JFK wouldn't be the only president killed in the Lone Star State. Oh no, he was determined to see that his successor would also be destroyed too. But it really hadn't been Kennedy who had begun it. Johnny had been sent to Vietnam under Eisenhower, and he went willingly. Oh yes, he deemed it his duty to serve his country. He did 3 tours of duty and was proud of his service, even when the damned hippies started their protests. But he had turned during LBJ's administration, and that was the man that he blamed for his current affliction. He didn't blame the creature that bit him and caused his affliction. That creature was just hungry. If Carradine hadn't been in Vietnam, then the parasite wouldn't have been able to feed on him. But that was 1963. Now, 10 years and thousands of miles away on this cold January Texas night, Johnny lifted the lid and read for the 1000th time the obituary that was taped to the inside of his coffin. The clipping erroneously reported that his platoon had been wiped out by the Viet Cong. The truth of the matter was that they had been wiped out by a clan of Setite vampires. Most of the platoon had been killed, but several had turned, though he doubted that the vampires who caused his condition knew or even cared about that fact. In his mind's eye, he imagined what it was like when the military personnel drove up to his mother's dooryard in their finest dress uniforms. The one on the passenger side would exit the vehicle with a grim look on his face, holding official papers. His mother would already be in tears as she knew what the letter said before it was handed to her. It would be the notification of her son's death. It would have been a cruel blow for Cindy Carradine, who had been widowed a year before her son left for Vietnam. Johnny's father, Seth, had been killed while cutting trees in a freak chainsaw accident. This would be 2 family tragedies a year apart. Johnny had agonized again and again over whether or not he should go home and tell his mother the truth. Which is more devastating, to let her think that he was dead, or to let her know that he had become one of the undead? Would the knowledge of his current existence be more painful to her than what she assumed was true? He didn't know. He needed help with his decision. and he didn't know where to get it. Johnny closed the newspaper on his obituary and turned it over to the front page. There was a different photo there. It was LBJ. Johnny felt foam form in his mouth. His eyes narrowed, and he was sure they had turned red with hatred. It didn't matter that LBJ had nothing to do with Johnny Carradine going to Vietnam, or that he had volunteered for his last tour of duty, the tour that saw him turn into a Setite. Somehow, it just seemed that it was all Johnson's fault. He ripped the picture out of the newspaper and carried it with him everywhere. Now Johnny arose and tore the picture of Johnson off of the inner lid to his coffin. He put it in his mouth and chewed it, then swallowed. Johnny wouldn't need it anymore after tonight. The former President of the United States of America had let his hair grow long. He was depressed. During his last year in office, teenagers had taunted him on the White House grounds. When he had taken office after JFK's assassination, he had been incredibly popular. In 1964, he won the largest popular vote in the history of the nation, a full 22 percentage points over his opponent. When he made his first speech to Congress as president, he said the appropriate thing. "All I have, I would gladly have given, not to be here today." Before he became the president, he was the vice president. And before that, he was Speaker of the House, and one of the most effective speakers in the history of this nation. As president, he thought nothing would be able to stop him. He passed legislation for health care, revitalized the dead economy, and supported civil rights like no other before him had ever done, or after for that matter. The architect of the great society. That's what he thought history would say about him. Yet he would not be remembered for any of this. What was he remembered for? Not something that he did. It was a brush fire that he did not start, but rather inherited, much like the presidency that he presided over for the first year of his administration. It was someone else's mess. He was a good politician. He had known when it was over and had decided not to run for re-election once it all turned. Besides, he knew that he wouldn't be able to live with the idea of Bobby Kennedy beating him in the primaries. That was the real reason for his leaving the presidential race. Of course, the opposing party would now inherit the White House as a result of that fateful decision. That's the way it went. Now it was Sunday, January 21st to be exact, when he was just sitting in his home, brooding about the collapse of his presidency. The air was crisp and the night sky clear, lit up with incredibly bright stars, brighter than usual. Lady Bird called him out to the porch shortly after the sun had set. She wanted him to see an unusually bright shooting star that had appeared. "Come out quick," she yelled to the former president. "What is it?" "A shooting star," she said. We've seen plenty of them." "Not like this one, dear." He ambled out of the house as fast as he could go. He had taken up smoking again against his wife's wishes and had gained weight since his presidency. His drinking had also increased. "That's real nice, dear," he said to his wife as the shooting star disappeared into the horizon. The former president breathed in a dose of that healthy Texas night air, then sat down on the porch swing and lit a cigar. He buttoned the top button of his shirt and pulled his sweater shut. The temperature had dropped considerably in the last hour. "Well, I think I'm going to turn in," Lady Bird informed her husband. She brushed the cigar smoke away from her nose and said, "Are you coming?" "In a minute, dear," he told her. "I'm going to have another smoke." Lady Bird shook her head and turned to go inside. He sat, smoking, and watched as the inside lights went off. He pictured the way she'd climb into bed, sitting sideways, feet together, and then turning until she was flat on her back. While he was thinking of his wife, he heard a rustling sound and looked up to see a tall, lanky man dressed in BDU green cross the yard and step up to the porch. "Damn it, how did you get past security?" Lyndon asked with a confused look on his face. "Those idiots at the front gate? It was easy," the stranger said and laughed. "What the hell do you want?" Lyndon said as he crushed his cigar and tossed it into the garbage can. "Dare I say it? It's a classic." "Say what?" "I've want to suck your blood," the stranger spoke in a phony Hungarian accent. "You'd better get your damn ass out of here, Al." "You'll do nothing, old man, except die." Lyndon saw by the look in his eye that Johnny meant business. He was going to make his mark on society. The president saw Johnny's bloodshot eyes open wide and felt his head push back. He struggled surprisingly strong for a man his age. He grabbed at Johnny's neck, and Johnny had to use his full strength to pull the man's hands off. He pulled LBJ to his feet, and they stood on the porch in an awkward, dance-like embrace, each one trying to hold down the arms of the other. Finally, Johnny wrenched one arm free, yanked aside the former president's head, and sank his teeth deep into LBJ's jugular vein. The former president struggled nobly, but in the end, he was no match for a being that had 3 times his strength. He succumbed to the vampire's bite and keeled over. Lyndon was barely conscious, but he could smell the demon's rancid breath as Johnny spoke. "Now, Mr. President, I will prevent you from becoming what I am by decapitating you." But shots rang out, and Lyndon and Johnny snapped their heads in the direction of gunfire. Several Secret Service agents were running in their direction. "One of them might have a cross," Lyndon heard Johnny think out loud. "I could still take them. Nah, not gonna risk it." Johnny turned into a wolf and fled the scene. Lyndon glanced up and saw Ladybird running toward them, .22 rifle in hand. "Oh, my lord, are you all right?" she said, alarmed. "I'm all right. Don't nobody worry about me. I got bit by a dog is all," the former president said, knowing they wouldn't believe the truth if he told them. "That didn't look like any dog I've ever seen. He ran on 2 feet, Head of Security Mike Howard exclaimed as he ran up to the porch. Lyndon reasoned that he saw Johnny before the transformation. "Let me take that from you, Mrs. Johnson." He eased the .22 from Ladybird's hands. "It was a dog, and I won't have any more discussion of this," the former president said, and let the security man move him back to his chair. "I'll be fine." "You'll need a rabies shot," Ladybird said as she handed him a shot of scotch. "I said I'll be fine." Lyndon looked to this head of security and said, "Are you going to get more security on this or what?" "Yes, Mr. President." Howard looked around the dark night and radioed for more security to the ranch. "Well, I'm going to look through the house anyway," he said, and then turned to 2 of the Secret Service men. "You 2 stay on the porch with the president." "Yes, Mr. Howard," the taller one said. "I'm going to get some bandages and antibiotics," Ladybird informed her husband, then went back into the house. "I'm all right, just a little tired. Let's go to bed." They tried to get the former president to go to a hospital, but he refused. So they helicoptered a doctor to the ranch. The doctor bandaged his neck and said, "I want to see you first thing in the morning, sir. I still say you should go to the hospital." "I don't need no damn hospital. It's just a small bite." "All right, sir. But we have to find that dog and check for rabies, too." The president retired to the bedroom with his wife. The next day was January 22nd, 1973. The president refused to get the bite checked. "I'm the president. I make the decisions around here," he said. "No one is looking at a little scratch on my neck." Not that it would have done him any good anyway. At 1:10 p.m., a thin trickle of blood seeped out of his wound. He put another Band-Aid on it. At 3:50 p.m., he called the switchboard. "Get Mike!" The former president gasped into the intercom. The Secret Service scrambled to reach their employer, bringing an oxygen unit. But it was too late. The former president was ashen gray, which they mistook for the blue skin of a man who died of natural causes. Mike Howard arrived at 3:55 p.m. and tried to do an external heart massage, but the president did not respond. By 4:45 p.m., Lyndon's body was in San Antonio, Texas, where Colonel George McGranahan pronounced him dead. An autopsy was ordered at Brooke Hospital. McGranahan prepped the autopsy room and returned to the morgue for the president's body. His assistant, Colonel Heiger, accompanied him. When they got back to the slab that held the former president, he was gone. They turned the morgue upside down, but the former president was nowhere to be found. "What the hell?" "Where did he go?" Heiger said. "He couldn't have just got up and left." McGranahan stared at his assistant for a long minute. "Someone must have stolen him." He paused and finally said, "Listen, I'm not getting in trouble for this. We have a John Doe over there that's about the same age." "You can't be serious. Do you want to explain to the media and the government how the body of the president disappeared, especially considering what happened to the president before him?" "But what if the body shows up somewhere?" "One problem at a time. We can say this was the body we were given. We did the autopsy, not the identification, McGranahan said. The two coroners quickly prepared the John Doe to make him look as much like the former president as they could. Luckily, he had been identified by Lady Bird before they brought him in. She would not have to look at the corpse again. Given the former president's desire for a closed casket funeral, McGranahan figured they were safe.